Daniel, and this is the Engineering Success Podcast, episode 70-something. I'm not sure which episode this will be yet, but I hope you guys are doing well. Things are good here in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's starting to heat up a little bit, approaching the summer on this beautiful May day. May Day, it's getting hot. Anyways, hope life's treating you guys well. Life's treating us well. We have some plans for Memorial Day weekend. We're going to go see some friends. That's where we're looking forward to our annual trip out into the mountains with our friends. Looking forward to that. Tomorrow I am dragon boat racing for the Charlotte Asian Festival. I'll be working with my colleagues to try to row a rowboat as fast as we can. And celebrate a little bit of my own Asian heritage. If you can't tell, I am Asian, for those of you that watch the video episodes of the podcast. And baby E is graduated from 1-year-old school, so that's a crazy fact and moment to realize that my child is approaching 2, which is just around the corner. Very, very wild. Anyways, so yeah, that's the life update. Before we get into the podcast, I have to give a big thank you to my top tier supporters, John Ott and Leroy Jenkins, for supporting me on Patreon. For $10 a month, you get a shout out at the beginning of every single episode of the podcast. I thank you, and you help me keep my website and my email alive, where you can email me at daniel@engringsuccess.com, daniel@engineeringsuccess.com, and where you can check out my website, where I sometimes update it with things about my life. There's a bunch of links to all my different social media platforms that I'm on, and you can see articles about the recent episodes on the podcast. You can also sign up for my mailing list there and get notified of each of my episodes of the podcast that way as well. All right, well, this podcast episode is an interview episode. I get to interview Joshua Tyner, a VP at REDCOM, a design build firm based in the Northeast in the New Jersey area, and it's a really cool interview. One thing that I really like about this interview in particular is that we actually get to go into some of the more technical aspects of what it's like to work at a land development firm and what it's like to work in a career of doing land development. So if you are interested in land development, this is a really cool episode for you. We're going to go into the details. And if you're not interested in land development, but you're interested in how things come together and how buildings and cities and municipalities work together to make sure that the right things are getting built and that we're doing the proper due diligence before we build things, then this is a great episode for you to learn the context around that. So anyways, without any further ado, I'll kick it over to the interview, and I hope you guys enjoy it. I am so excited to introduce our guest on this week's episode of the Engineering Success Podcast. Joshua Tyner graduated with his Bachelor's of Science in Civil Engineering from Penn State University, and in the 30 years since, he's collected a vast wealth of experience in delivering projects from concept to completion. Joshua is the Vice President of Engineering at REDCOM, an award-winning full-service commercial architectural design, engineering, and commercial contracting company operating in the New Jersey and surrounding areas. Joshua also contributes to our industry as a published author of continuing education courses, which is something that I, as an engineer, am very grateful for. I am so excited to interview him on today's episode of Engineering Success to learn more about his journey from EIT to pursuing his PE to VP, leading engineering delivery. Joshua, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. How are you doing today? And can I call you Josh, or what do you go by?
Oh, yeah. Either way is fine.
Yeah. Perfect. How's your week been?
I'm doing well. Yeah, thanks. I'm excited about this.
I'm excited too. I think it was a couple weeks ago that we had our intro call, and ever since then, it's just been really exciting thinking about this coming up. What kind of stuff you been doing this week at REDCOM?
Oh, it's been a pretty busy week. Moving forward with a bunch of projects that are in progress design. We've been looking at some conceptual ideas for various things that our sales department brings in. And just trying to keep things moving forward on all the projects.
Awesome. Well, you obviously weren't always a VP delivering engineering projects. At one point in time, you started out as a young person that was thinking about your engineering career journey. And one thing I like to ask people is how did they discover their passion for engineering? So what about you? What drove you to pursue engineering?
Yeah. It's interesting. You started out, I can't believe it's been 30 years. You said
sorry
30
about
years
that.
since I graduated, and that's right. 1995. So, it's been a long journey, but it's been exciting. And, for me, it's gotten better over the years. I really do have a passion for this and I enjoy it a lot, what we're doing. To be honest, when I started out, I didn't have any idea that this is what I would have wanted to do. Growing up, so I've told this story to some people. Growing up, I remember I was always around construction because my father owned a small contracting firm when I was a kid. And I remember being like out on a project site and him being like, don't go down in that trench, and then it being the 70s or early 80s. And I was like Gen X kid being raised where we kind of like could do whatever we wanted around uh, the neighborhood and stuff. He was off doing something inside the building and I went down in the trench. And he tells
Oh
a
no.
story about how he suddenly heard my voice. He's like, Dad. And but I remember it. What I remember, because I know I was in like first grade. I remember when he pulled me out of the trench, I could look back and my boot was like stuck down in the mud. So he had to
Oh,
then go down and get my boot. So I've been around construction my whole life, and but I was pretty good at math in school, and so when I was thinking about what to do, talking over with my parents, they were like, you could study engineering, and if you don't like it, you could change. And so I applied for the engineering school at Penn State and got accepted and went into it, and that's what I stuck with. One of the reasons I chose civil engineering, because there's a wide range of disciplines that you can select if you're looking at engineering. For me, one of the reasons I liked civil engineering was the idea of kind of like every property is like a lump of clay, so they're all different to start with. So it's different challenges leading into each one. And there's maybe an artistic element to carving out the site into what you want it to be or what you can make out of it. And so that's kind of how I got into civil engineering anyway.
that's awesome. Yeah, I think civil engineering is an extremely versatile degree, and you said that there's multiple different specialties within civil engineering. Did you end up kind of going one way more than another whenever you went
Well,
to
yeah,
school or
so
whenever you came
really,
out?
right. So when you're looking at civil engineering degrees, or like even like the disciplines that you study for when you study for the licensing exam, it really comes down to environmental, transportation or traffic, geotechnical, structural, and then water resources. And water resources then ends up being maybe like water distribution, but also the like analysis of stormwater. And so anybody that's involved in land development or even maybe like highway design, like you get involved in drainage design as a civil engineer on the water resources side. And so that ended up being what I was more focused on and interested in than particularly like structural, which again, that felt more like calculations of things like mechanical engineers or architects work on. And I think a lot of it seems like structural is going to be really exciting, but for me, I just kind of moved in the direction of what would get me closer to land development. Um,
Yeah.
I guess one of the other things, not to uh, just jump right back into another topic, but with land development, then you actually are like involving all the other disciplines of civil engineer. And while it might not be my specialty discipline, we do touch on it. I can imagine if you're a geotechnical consultant, most of everything you do is like the geotech for projects, and you're doing the same kind of thing. Whereas like to be involved in land development, you have to hire a geotechnical consultant. You have to kind of get yourself familiar with uh, a lot of what the things that they're the expert on, but you're not just doing the one thing. I don't know if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. And feel free to go off script anytime. You can talk about whatever you
Do we
want.
have a script?
I mean, we kind of do. Yeah. Just breaking the third wall there. Yeah, no, it's really, I've talked to a lot of people that are civil engineers, and I don't think we've actually gotten to break out the different disciplines like that. So I'm glad that you did that. And I think that any aspiring engineer that listens to that should, especially if you're going to be a civil engineer, you should know about the different ways that civil engineers can go. And you obviously working in land development, that's it's good to know that you can touch all of them in land development. Was there a particular class for you that you took in college that kind of helped you find out what you wanted to do, or was the most applicable class? Like, was there anything that like you remember specifically?
I remember that I didn't like differential equations. Let me think of what I did
Me
like.
neither, man. Me neither. I didn't like differential
There
equations at all.
was, yeah, I do feel like I liked hydrology in general. I don't remember what the name of the course was. It was a 400 level course where we had a teacher that had us lay out a neighborhood on a raw piece of land and then
Oh, that's cool.
bring like water distribution to it and show the sanitary drainage from it and picking up like each of the properties that we carved out. And so that was a fun project type of a class. And I do recall liking that one a lot.
Very cool. So let's talk about your career a little bit. Obviously, you weren't always a VP of engineering. Where did you kind of start your career, and how were there any particular moments in your career that kind of stood out to you as the things that help you get to where you are now?
Hmm. Yeah, so when I first started, when I first graduated, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, how to go about. I applied to a few places, but at that point, my father had sold his business, the one that had me stuck in the mud, and he started working with and running in partnership with another individual a company that specialized in data center construction. And so I had an opportunity to work in their CAD department. So when I first graduated, um, I knew that working in AutoCAD at the time was going to be a skill set. It's funny, when I was in high school, we had hand drafting as a class, but no
Wow,
one's doing that
can't
anymore.
relate. Yeah, I
Um,
can't relate to that.
yeah, so but yeah, so AutoCAD had been around, but like it was definitely a skill set that you were going to need as an engineer. And there was an opportunity to work in the CAD department with this data center design build firm. And I got exposed to mechanical and electrical, plumbing, drawings, and engineering to some degree. Um, Actually being involved in some designs for a couple of years. And then one of the construction managers, we uh, signed a project that was going to be out in Phoenix. And he asked me if I wanted to be his assistant project manager, because if I didn't, he was going to hire somebody out there to be his assistant. And so I decided to jump at that opportunity. And so now I was involved in construction management. And I tell people all the time, from an engineering perspective, if you see things and how they get built in the field, it makes a big difference in your understanding of what you have to put on plans. And so I don't know how to convince people to do that or how to make that a standard in the world, but being a construction manager and having to deal with conflicts on plans and how to fix those problems or unforeseen conditions that you encounter when you're on a project, being in the field was great. And I did that for several years. I ran some projects by myself, was on some other projects that were also very large. We had multiple project management team members on the projects. But I do remember then being on a site it was a raw land property that was out in Colorado. And it had a local, this was in the Denver area, but a local Colorado-based civil engineering firm that had done the civil site plans. And in construction, there were things that we encountered. I tell this story of how there was this Friday afternoon around 4 o'clock, and there was a sanitary pipe that was across the street that wasn't shown on the plans. And there was a treatment plant like two or three properties away. And so this was a 24-inch sanitary pipe that we had to cross over to get to a regional basin for the drainage to tie into. And so we were proposing or installing the proposed RCP, that's a reinforced concrete pipe, uh, to go into that basin. And the excavator broke open that 24-inch sanitary sewer pipe at like 4 o'clock on a Friday. So then we were there till like 6 a.m. Like they had the emergency source massive
Oh man.
24-inch Fernco fittings, which are like the rubber fittings that you would see on like plumbing pipe in your house or something, but they were like massive. And then we cased the whole thing in concrete, and we're there all night, just emergency patching this pipe. But like after being involved in that, I started to get this itch for wanting to do what I studied in school, and that was to be involved in some land development properties, more so the construction than the construction side. So after that job is when I started to look for a civil engineering job on my own.
Makes sense. So then after that, you took a job with a group. We got to do some of that design, and then you grew in your career. You became a project engineer with another firm, and then after that, you went into a smaller kind of development group that was also surveying and also developing, and then just you went from EIT to project engineer to senior engineer to project manager to growing up in an organization, then getting hired into your first role at the VP director level, and then now you're here. Um,
Yeah.
which maybe that's the quickest way to generalize 30 years in somebody's career, but you started in CM, you got that background on how projects come together, then you got to grow as an engineer through 5 or 6 different career transitions. Were there any particular moments throughout that timeline that helped you realize how projects come together beyond the CM side?
Yeah. So when I left the construction management and started working in engineering, I learned pretty quickly that in land development, civil engineering, particularly getting your engineering license is going to be an important step, because part of it is signing and sealing plans. But in New Jersey, particularly where I was working, in order to testify at the public hearings associated with getting the approvals, you have to be a licensed engineer. And so I started to research, oh, well, what is it that I have to do to get my license? And yeah, in fact, let me just say to any young engineer, like, the EIT exam is a prerequisite. That's the engineering training exam to taking the PE exam. And I honestly think the sooner you take that test, the better, because so much of that information is the fundamentals of engineering, and it's talking about disciplines across all the disciplines. So there's a part of that test that has electrical engineering, a part of that test that has chemistry. And it's funny. This is another funny story of like it falling into place. Like, I, the reason I took the EIT exam is because one of my professors at Penn State asked us, he said, I'll give you extra credit if you take the EIT exam. So I got like 10 points of extra credit. I don't even remember what class it was, but he gave us 10 points of extra credit and I ended up passing. I didn't even really prepare that much for it, but it's because there was like, I was in that engineering economics class, which isn't something that would like come easy for me now, the knowledge base of it, but we were learning it at school, and then the exam was on some of that content. So the sooner you take that exam, the better. There's no reason to wait. So like I said, well, I was now looking to get my PE exam. I'm like, what are the prerequisites? Oh, I have to have this test. I called my mom. I was like, I think I passed that. I was like, hey, do you have a thing that says I passed the EIT? And she was like, I don't know. You have a folder here of things. So I went and I had it and I passed it. And so I was like excited that I could submit for my PE exam because I had already passed the EIT. I had the number of years of design experience, and so I was ready to go.
Yeah. And you took your exam, and then you got your PE, and then you started testifying. I think that you learning how to testify and what it meant to testify was a big part of your growth. And obviously, it's the first thing that kind of came to mind for you. Can you explain a little bit about what that process is like for people that are not familiar with land development, and then maybe share a story about how that helped you grow?
Let me think about what you're asking, because it is important. Like, one of the things I'd say about my career is that, like, while some places I may have stayed at a little longer than, or at others at times, there was always value to the way that it came out for me. Like, I never spent a lot of time in a position where I was like floundering to find like the next logical thing. And so like I learned a great deal of things at one of the companies I worked for called Bowler Engineering. They were like amazing at teaching you the land development process and guiding you into that in a very intentional way. They wanted their engineers to learn it and understand it. And so that was like great for my career. But there was also at that company kind of a challenge to get yourself the experience of testifying at hearing, because they were like the kind of like leading project managers would handle that, because there's a lot on the line. The stakes are high walking into those hearings, and so you need to have experienced people doing it. So one of the reasons I did make a change from that company even though I loved it, was because of opportunities to testify at a smaller company that I went to. They were looking for somebody that could do that. And so I had to I had been going and observing how it goes.
Yeah.
And really in New Jersey, that this is all done in public under something called the Sunshine Law. There's probably a more technical name, but they always say at the beginning of the hearing, also known as the Sunshine Law, basically meaning that they want there to be transparency in this land development approval process, because whatever you're going to be putting on a property, there's laws and rules associated with it, and the boards aren't supposed to just make political arbitrary decisions. They should be making decisions based on evidence and what's best for the property and what's reasonable and acceptable. So I had opportunities then to testify at one of the smaller companies that I went to, and I was there for several years, before I had another kind of opportunity come along, and which made me transition again. In terms of though what it means to testify, that can be a little nerve-wracking if you're not someone that's comfortable public speaking. You might not want to be that as part of your career path, if you think that that's how you can succeed. But there's plenty of opportunities where you don't have to do that in engineering, civil, land development. Like you can become a drainage expert and just focus on getting the drainage designs done, or you can be really good at the site plans. You don't even ever have to get a license to have a successful career in engineering at a site land development firm. But that's just one of the things that I did. So yeah, so you have to explain to the board what and why you did the engineering. In New Jersey, again, in order to justify what's called a variance, a professional planner has to actually testify to that. So we should, when we're testifying, identify all the things that are missing on a plan or not compliant, but we can't really say particularly this is why it's okay. The planner has to do that. But it's important that we put it on the record. So we have to be very thorough and detailed in what we're preparing for when we present to the board. And then the other thing that I always try to keep in mind is that the people on the board, while sometimes, yes, there's politics involved and they don't maybe want the thing approved, most of the time they're just trying to understand what you're trying to do. And so if you take that tact of, I'm going to slowly, calmly just explain to people who don't yet understand what we're trying to do here, what it is, in a way that they can follow and understand, you'll be pretty successful.
That's cool. Thanks for explaining that. I usually don't get to dive into the technical nuances of people's industries on this podcast. It's almost always completely career focused, but I've just found the insights that you share into the land development process to be so fascinating as somebody who has not come from that space at all. So I'm just so glad that you shared that, and thank you for that. And then also thank you for sharing about that transition and why you made that choice. I think that's probably a pretty common through line that I observed in your career and talking to you, is that it seemed that each time that you made a move, you made it for a reason and you made it to grow in a particular way, which I think is really cool. And I think that that's probably one of the reasons why you've reached the position that you are now, being an executive leader for a design build firm that's delivering projects and impacting our society. What would you feel that that's the same way, as that every move that you made was very intentional? And if so, when did you realize you wanted to become an executive leader, and how did you kind of start making intentional moves towards that?
Yeah, I don't know that I would say that that's what I was looking for. I just, over time, you just become comfortable with leadership, I think. And so once you're comfortable with it, I don't know. I don't really have a good answer for that. I don't think I was looking to become an executive leader.
Really? Okay.
But it also wasn't like I thought of it as I don't want to be just an engineer that's doing calculation work either. I think, something happened where once I got into some kind of leadership, I began to see that we can solve problems, whatever they are. Yeah. And it it was a challenge, but once I started to realize that we're always going to be able to figure out some kind of answer to a problem, we just have to, and to find the best one is kind of the key, and that the tools you pick up along the way show up at times in your career. I just started to have a level of confidence that I could solve the problems and give the clients the best things that they needed so that they would not spend too much money. Like, we want to save them money and get them the best situation for what they're trying to accomplish. But B, you stumble across a problem that you didn't anticipate, that it's not going to be impossible to solve whatever the problem is. There'll be an answer one way or another. Once I started to have that confidence, I guess it just became natural that I fell into, I mean, I certainly had to strive to become, to get the kind of position I got, but in a way, these things just also feel like they come together. I don't know how to explain it other than that.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, and maybe it wasn't like you were plotting a long time ago, but it does seem like each move that you made it felt right at the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then next thing you know, you're the VP of Engineering Design at REDCOM. So how did that happen? How did you start with REDCOM?
Yeah, so I had been working at another company for a little while, and I put my resume out. It was like I wasn't necessarily looking for a job, but I was open to opportunities, and occasionally, if I saw something that kind of interested me, I would apply for it. When this opportunity came up, I think I was in a hotel room, and I was like, "Yeah, let me see if there's any jobs out there." And and then I saw one and I applied to it, and the owner of the company, REDCOM, his name's Craig Reddington, he called me the next day. And so we just got to chatting and, kind of hit it off. One of the things that was interesting was we had gone to the same high school, and I was actually, I think I'm a grade older than his sister. And so, like, there was sort of a connection there, and that, like, I mean, obviously he called her, and I think she maybe had told him that, like, yeah, he was funny in high school, but like,
Funny, nice. That's a good one to get.
That's a pretty decent reference when you didn't plan it, to have a reasonable family connection that you didn't know you were going to have with the opportunity. So, so when I had my first in-person interview with Greg, it was actually like a little more than 5 years ago, because it was right at the beginning. It was like right before COVID started. And so when COVID kind of hit, there was like the lockdowns, they put a pause on the, like the job opportunity, because they were like, we got to make sure what this is going to mean and it's stable. And then come May, it was like, okay, everything's going to be okay. We want to move forward. And so I was excited and came here and then started working, and we all had to wear masks. I didn't even know what anybody looked like for like 6 months.
Yeah.
And yeah.
That is an interesting time to come into a space. And so, as the VP of Engineering Design at REDCOM, you lead the engineering department, I assume, right? So, what's your team? What does your team do, and how do you fit into the larger picture of what you guys do at REDCOM?
Right. So REDCOM is a construction company. The solutions that we want to provide to people are to build their buildings, right? Complete their buildings that they need, and to do that. Now, over the years, when the company was kind of evolved by Greg Reddington, it got into design build, right? So we would design opportunities and construct them. So a lot of construction companies don't do design at all. And probably just a few years before I came to the company, they started to do the design part under consulting agreements, which makes our department function a lot like a professional services engineering firm, with the benefit that we're not really trying to make the money. We're just really more like trying to cover our costs with our engineering in a consulting agreement. So, professional service engineering firm, they're trying to make their money on the engineering. We're hoping to create the construction opportunity by serving the client well during engineering and accomplish everything that the engineering firm would accomplish, and basically show the client that we're good at solving problems and creating solutions for them. So that's what our department does. Sometimes if we're very busy with the staff, I might reach out and use an outside vendor, like another engineering firm, where we kind of are more like owner's rep, and we let that company get the approval done so that it happens faster, because obviously the timing of things is critical to clients to be able to get it to market as quick as possible. And so sometimes we would do that, which puts us again in a unique position where other engineering firms that we work with see us as a client. So, and I have some really good partnerships with a few of them where, like, I've taught them ideas that we've learned on projects, like things that we were able to get past, for example, NJDEP, that were counterintuitive to the way the new rules came out or something. So we learned from on one of our projects, and very rarely do engineering firms talk with each other. You know, it's a big firm has a lot of resources and they learn their stuff, or a small firm, they might flounder because they're having a hard time knowing how things can get done. But how do they get other ideas and resources? Well, I kind of share with some other companies ideas and resources. Well, not necessarily resources, but ideas for sure. And so we've suggested ideas when we've learned them on some of our projects where another engineering firm could learn from us. And there have been times where I can call up some of the guys that we use and I'm like, hey, do you guys have any, ideas of what you could do in a situation like this? So it's like having a larger resource pool available than maybe an engineering firm might have if they were a small company. And so we do that. And what's our role? Well, I guess to build things in anywhere but in New Jersey, particularly, you need to have a building permit, right? Well, in order to get a building permit, you have to have, well, let me just qualify that. If it's like an interior renovation where you're building something inside the walls of a building, you can go get a building permit. You just apply for a building permit, you get it. But if you're doing an addition or expanding building or a brand new building on a property, you have to get your site plan approval. That isn't like that everywhere in the country. A lot of people that do development in other parts of the country, they're really surprised that they can't just go take a building down for a permit. But in New Jersey, you have to go through this site plan approval process that's regulated basically slightly differently in every municipality, but the way it's laid out is under the municipal land use law in New Jersey. So you basically follow this process, you apply, you design it, you submit it, they deem you complete. Deeming complete is I don't know if you want me to get into the minutiae of this, but
keep on going.
Deeming
this
complete,
is awesome.
It's like it's a critical step in getting protection for your approval. So if the town changes the zoning on you, but you've been deemed complete, you get heard under that original zoning. So it's very important to a developer that you get deemed complete if they think there might be a political opposition to the project. So you try to do that as quickly as possible. You try to get it in and get this town to say, yes, it's deemed complete. And then you get scheduled for what's called the hearing. And the hearing is the thing I kind of was alluding to a little earlier with the sunshine law. And then that's where we present the application. And then as a part of the application, there's going to be reviews by the township. The township hires engineering. Sometimes they have engineers in staff in their department. Sometimes they hire consulting engineers. But whoever it is, they review your documents and make comments and suggestions. And then at the hearing, the board members may have comments, suggestions, or things that they'd like to see. And so if you get approved in one hearing, you still have to incorporate all these changes and go get the outside agency approvals as well for final resolution compliance. Resolution compliance means that board approves you. Well, then they memorialize a resolution that says, okay, this is approved. You got to do this and that and that and this. And those things that you have to do are called, or that step, that phase, we call it the resolution compliance phase, because we're complying with the criteria that the board has established. And once you do all those things, which can take a month or 3 months, sometimes you're waiting for a wetland permit in New Jersey and it takes 9 months because DEP is very slow on issuing a wetland permit. But bottom line is that at the end of complying with everything, you have resolution compliance, and the board will now sign the site plan. And once you have the signed site plans, that's when the zoning officer recognizes or is permitted to say, okay, now you can submit for a building permit.
Wow.
So
It's a long
the way it
process.
falls into place really in terms of development is a developer isn't gonna, well, there's always risk factors involved that a developer is comfortable with or may not like what they would decide. But like if there's a high risk that like there could be a problem getting it approved at the board level, they're not going to spend much money on architects putting together the building permit drawings.
Yeah.
Right? Because architects draw the building, they draw the layout of the building, all the partition sections, so that it's showing that everything is code compliant in the building. They have to hire a mechanical engineer, an electrical engineer, plumbing, and they have to put all these drawings together, and structural engineers that do the footings and foundation design for the structural aspects of the building. And they submit that whole thing to the building department for code review and to get your building permit. You're not able to even submit for that until you have your signed site plans. But why would a developer spend all this money on architectural plans if they might not get approved at the site plan level? So it kind of just works out in a way that once you get approved at the board, now all the risk is out of the way, because it's just a matter of time to get through resolution compliance. And so that's when they'll often hire the architect to start the building permit plans. And so that resolution compliance phase, it takes us about 2-3 months. It takes about 2-3 months to put together architectural plans. And so that all just rolls together. And then now we have signed site plans, we can submit for the building permit. And then again, REDCOM, as a company that's familiar with construction, design, build, we are right there to then go submit the building permits for them, pull them, and then break ground as soon as possible.
Wow, that's cool. So you basically, the developer comes to you and says, hey, I'm thinking about building this thing, and I'm thinking about building it here. And you actually make sure that it is viable, I guess, for them to actually build the thing there. You take it through all the regulatory aspects of it. And then they go out and they hire an architect to design the building, and maybe the architect will hire an engineering firm to actually do the design drawings. And then you guys come in and then build it according to those drawings? Or do you actually sometimes get involved in also designing maybe the footprint of the building or the foundations for the building? And like the MEP inside the building. Where does your engineering?
So these are great questions. So out there, like let's just talk about like out there in the world, right? So like if you're talking about an engineering firm that just does engineering professional services and they're trying to make their money on engineering, they're not going to have any in-house architectural. That client is going to have to hire an architect to be their architect. And in the site plan approval process, you actually have to submit a floor plan and elevation that shows the board what this building's going to look like. But it isn't, I would say it's not meant to be construction document level of detail. It's a building shell and floor plan of like what we think will be code compliant that will be able to be made into building permit plans down the road. And so REDCOM has the architectural department in-house as well. So where we do still sort of get into design build contracts, occasionally we might do that with the civil engineering and the site plan part, but we do still regularly do design build contracts where once we have the site plan approval, we'll give them like a fee to go design and build the building and the site work. So cool. So we have estimators that are estimating site work based on our drawings, and we have architects that are drawing the building. We don't do in-house MEP, which is the mechanical, electrical, plumbing. We hire a sub-consulting mechanical, electrical, or plumbing firm to do those drawings. But we do coordinate that because the architects are like the quarterback of that whole thing. So we have the architects in-house. We draw the drawings of the building. Like they're going to be something that can be submitted. And then REDCOM, if we're in a design build contract, then we're just like running with it. It saves a bunch of time by hiring us to do like that all together, because it's just easier. It's seamless. We're constantly updating ourselves internally to make it as efficient as possible. But yeah, so then our construction team people are the ones that like kind of take it down there, and then they're constantly following up with the building code people on trying to see how quickly we can get it out of the permit phase so that we can break ground. Sometimes we get the architecture and that client wants to bid it and put it to the street. And so they take our drawings, our site drawings, and then our architectural drawings, and we give a price, but another contractor also gives a price that wasn't involved in designing it all. You know, a lot of times they might miss something because they're not as familiar with the drawings as we are. So their number might seem lower, but I bet they're going to make it up later.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, I know that feeling. I used to work for an EPC firm, and we the same thing. We try to get the feed, the preliminary engineering, and then they take it out to bid, and then we come in high. But like, we know what the problems are. They're gonna change
right,
order you to death. Yeah.
right. Yeah, and we do. I mean, REDCOM is really, we try really hard to not
Yeah.
have any change orders if we can help it. Usually the change orders will be related to either some really serious unforeseen condition or specific changes that the client made after the contract. And
Yeah.
they understand that usually. So nobody wants to spend more money, but you know, everybody recognizes what's fair is fair. So
Yeah.
usually, I think it usually works out well. Our construction people are like, yeah, it's a headache though, and it's hard.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
um,
Oh yeah.
you know, you
That's
have to
good.
navigate that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, oh man, this is really fun. I think as somebody that kind of played in that space a little bit, especially working for an EPC firm and going through those proposals and that kind of stuff, it's fun to hear how you've experienced it. I think the design build, I mean, you as you described it, it's much faster, and because of that, we're seeing it
Right.
grow a lot more. Where you have like companies like REDCOM that are doing design build, and then you have other companies that are engineering firms and construction firms trying to figure out how they can deliver a project together. So
Right.
understanding and learning about how that process works is really valuable for any engineer that wants to work in the consulting or the construction management space. Is there a particular project that I guess has been the most memorable one to you, or maybe a recent project that you're just really proud of that you could kind of talk about to help everybody
Oh
understand kind of
yeah.
what brings you joy in your world in your work?
There's a lot. I mean, one of the things that um I I, I got to tell you, the thing that I'm the most excited about at Redcom right now, especially in the engineering department, is how like awesome the team is at working together and figuring out ways to solve problems. We're really comfortable with each other now. I think the trust factor is very high, and we're also enjoying what we're doing, and we're not afraid to come up with ideas. So, like, like one of the engineers in our department, his name's Jordan. This is probably not the memorable thing that I'm going to talk about in a minute, but like this was very memorable because we were on a call with NJDEP on a project talking about the challenges with some groundwater stuff, and and he threw out an idea that I think a lot of engineers would have been afraid in front of a bunch of people to throw out as an idea. And the DEP reps were like, actually, that's a good idea, and we would let you do that. And so like it was like a totally new thing. And like I think the fact that Jordan knows that like I want him to try to come up with ideas and not be afraid of looking foolish because the ideas come out of like what's in your mind, don't be afraid of it. You know what I mean? Like the tools you've come up
Yeah.
with, they play off each other, and so it was a great idea of like putting a liner on the perimeter of an above ground basin to keep perched groundwater out of the basin, which we were like, I don't know how we're going to ever do this. And then he says that, and the DEP guy's like, yeah, we'd let you do that. And suddenly we're like, another tool. So like, so that's the kind of thing that I love about like what's going on here at REDCOM in the engineering department. But like the specific example that I'm like kind of really like proud of and excited about was it's a job that we have right now that's going on down in Middlesex Borough. This is for a client of ours that we had already built a building for him. It's called straight edge striping, and he took some risk and bought another property that was down in a flood hazard area. And he bought the property because, well, one of the reasons it wasn't like a huge risk factor was that another engineering firm had gotten a warehouse type development approved on his property recently. So worst case scenario, he could always build that and then sell it, like kind of flip it after he built it, if that's what it came to. But he wanted to put his building there. And we talked to that firm a little bit, and this was right when the changes, there were some recent new changes to the flood hazard area regulations, which actually made the flood level, the regulatory flood level and what you have to like build above higher. So like they changed the rules recently, and so like now you have to be even further out of like what would be the flood, where the flood plain used to be. So anyway, we talked to that engineering firm. He's like, they just changed the rules. You're never going to get something different approved here. And so we're like, okay, yeah, that's tough. And we started like bantering around and brainstorming a little bit and talking about, and this was one of the tools that I had learned about like probably in 2005, that you can allow flood water to go underneath the building on a commercial building with something called flood vents that allow flood water to come in and be stored there during the flood and then go out. Because in New Jersey, the flood regulations are, it wasn't like this when I was starting my career. It used to be actually able to put like fill in the flood hazard area. Now you can't. You're limited to what's called zero net fill. So if you define on a site where is the flood hazard area, and that gives you an existing amount of flood water that comes onto the property. And in what you propose, you can't let less than that amount of flood water be stored on the property. Does that make sense?
Oh.
So in order to allow this to happen, we proposed part of the water underneath the office spaces by letting flood water come under the building, and that's going to cost the client a little more, but it makes him able to do what he wants to do on his property. And the fact that we got it through and approved, that we came up with the idea, crunched the numbers. And again, this is a testament to the people in the department. I didn't crunch the numbers. I said, let's see if we can make it work. And they analyzed it and, said, oh, we have to make this a little smaller. And they're not going to be able to do that as much here. And then we had to coordinate it with our in-house architects. So, there's some really neat things happening under that building. Like under the bathrooms, there's like a column, like a wall that coming out of the bathroom is the sanitary pipe. It goes through the dirt to the main part of the dirt, but the flood water's happening around that in this sort of interstitial space, almost like a basement. And so the architects coordinated that with their MEP, and we all made it work, and we still were able to store enough flood volume on that property between that and the portion that we put under the building, and made it work. And Middlesex Borough had their own sort of flood, I don't know, they were like some kind of flood group that had to approve the fact that you're doing work in the floodway. I don't know that they weren't the DEP level of review, but like when we applied to them, they were like, how'd you get DEP to approve that? We never heard of that idea. Like, I kind of sort of thought it was common knowledge. And that's one of the things I always encourage people. It's like, when you learn a tool, just remember it and pay attention, because it might come back around someday, because you're going to use it. Or if you don't, you might use it. And it could at least think about it when you're brainstorming ideas. The other thing that I really like at REDCOM is we will come up with ideas like that, but we have such good construction knowledge in-house that we we'll grab guys like John Kanata and we'll talk about our ideas, and we'll be like, we could do it this way or that way. And he'll be like, well, you're going to save a lot of money if you do it that way. Or we'll have our site supers looking at the site plans, and they'll be like, if you design it this way, it's going to be really hard for us to get the crane on where we're going to tilt up the walls. So why don't you shift that thing over here so that we can put the crane over here during construction? And so like we're thinking through all of it, and it really does save people money in the long run to have all that expertise looking at how we design it. Other engineering firms, I just don't think have that level of knowledge. I'm not saying they're shooting in the dark totally. Like the really big good engineering firms do know a lot of this stuff I'm talking about as well. But I just feel really a lot of confidence in our team here at REDCOM. So it's exciting. It's an exciting time.
That's awesome. Yeah, constructability and design definitely matters. It's definitely important. So I
Right.
remember, selling constructability reviews and just understanding that and having the construction team's input and design is really important. It's great that you guys really go out of your way to make sure that happens. I've pretty much asked every question that you know what? We've talked about what advice you'd give to a young person about collecting their tools. Any other advice you give to a young person in engineering? Pick their
Um,
PE early, save all their
yeah,
tools, go
definitely
out into
take
the
the EIT
field.
as soon as you can.
Yeah.
I guess don't be afraid of making mistakes because that's one of the best way to learn things. Obviously, try not to make mistakes, but I guess, and definitely, what people do is that they don't speak up. That that's probably the biggest problem. If you're not sure of something, that's the part. I think that's more important than not being afraid to not make mistakes. Don't be afraid to look like you don't know something. It's okay to not know something. It's better than not raising your hand because you're afraid you'll look dumb for not knowing something. You have to bring up, if you don't know something, it's better to just let people know that you're not sure, and so you need to think about it more or whatever, and then go find out and ask somebody else who you think will know about something. You know what I mean? Because if you don't raise your hand and you're the one that's hearing about something and it just keeps going through, that problem is going to come back and it's either going to bite you or it's going to cost somebody money down the road. And so not being afraid to raise your hand and look like you don't know something that you think other people are going to think you should know is the best thing. And so I feel like that's that's something I really am happy about at the point of my career, because I know I don't know everything. But when something doesn't pass my test of like, I already know how I'm gonna do that, I'm I'm gonna be like, all right, well, that sounded confusing to me. So can somebody explain that a little more to me? Because that way it might not even be my responsibility, but I don't feel like what I heard is going to have the architect understand it, and he's got to look at this. So maybe he does understand it, maybe he doesn't, but I I do like to find those anomalies of things that don't seem like they could fall through the cracks and bring them to the forefront. And I think that that's huge in terms of communication and a confidence level. I actually think if you don't know something and you feel like you should, by saying you don't shows confidence. So yeah.
That is phenomenal advice. And I think that now that you say that, I reflect on like any kind of meeting I've ever had with a leader in my companies that I've worked at. All of my leaders, they did a great job, like you said, of not being worried about, I guess, being seen as incompetent or whatever, because they knew that they were competent in what they did. So
Right.
whenever they didn't understand anything, when they didn't understand something, they knew that they could step out, and actually say something. Say, "Hey, can you explain this to me? This doesn't make sense to me." That's a great piece of advice. What other characteristics have you observed that are in good leaders? And I think that'll be my last
Hmm.
question. We'll
Yeah.
close on that one.
Honestly, I think it's important that a leader sees people for the fact that they're people. It's hard for engineers to do. Engineers are like more interested in things than people a lot of times. These are stereotypes, of course. You want to hear a joke? One of my favorite jokes
Yeah, I'm ready.
that my one of my old bosses used to tell you. He'd say, "How do you know who the outgoing engineers are? They're looking at the other person's shoes." because
Oh,
because engineers are like, I'm just gonna be like da da da. So you know, we're not like the most outgoing bunch all the time as engineers. But when you try to see people for the fact that there's a human component, that they have value as a person, that they have challenges in their personal life, and you try to care about that, it makes a difference in their ability to do the best that they can do. I think because they feel safe. They trust your leadership, and so building trust is an important characteristic of any leader. And, that is certainly, I think, one of the things that they're intentional about as leadership here at REDCOM is just valuing people and recognizing, that kindness makes a difference, patience. Obviously, everything is fast paced and there's a lot at stake and you can't waste time and you have to work hard, but treating people like they have value is a very important thing for a leader, to me.
That's awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for that, Josh. And then thank you so much for your time for this hour here today. I really appreciate that we got to meet one another before this and that we got to talk about your journey. I think you have a really cool career journey. I think it's one that a lot of civil engineers would aspire to. And I think you also shared a lot of great insights, both about your personal career and also about your industry. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great. I really appreciate just the way you conducted the interview. And is it an interview? The podcast.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I look
Thanks,
forward
Josh.
to talking to you again.
Yeah, maybe we'll collaborate together. You never know. I work for an engineer. You work for a design build firm. Maybe we can make something happen.
Sounds good.
All right, perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Engineering Success Podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did enjoy it, make sure to tap that subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything to subscribe on YouTube, and then hit that notification bell to get notified of all things engineering success. And also, thank you to all the people that helped me reach 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. It's an amazing accomplishment that we hit 1,000 subscribers, and we just keep on growing. So thank you so much for your support. Share the episode with somebody that you think might enjoy it. If you know any aspiring engineers that are interested in engineering, please send them Engineering Success, where you can catch me on YouTube and all your preferred audio platforms. And yeah, thank you so much for supporting Engineering Success. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.
I'm miscommunicating. I just made a pilot, then they threw me on the stations. Now I'm not complaining. My thoughts get complicated, I cannot explain in lameness. Never losing focus because I ain't chasing payments. Still playing in the basement while I'm working on arrangements. They heard the kid in 50 countries, thank God that's amazing. But I'd rather thank Spotify, they put me on the station.